This is Tim,
And this is Matt.
and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics, sponsored by ComicsNow.com. I'm on Skype, Skype on my end, it's landline on his end, with Matt Silady in San Francisco, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And, of course, Matt's been on once before. We talked about his graphic novel, The Homeless Channel. And I was just looking at your site, and I saw that it's been nominated for an Eisner.
Yeah,
So,
that's
congratulations.
was a big surprise a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Cool. So what does that mean exactly, the special recognition category?
Well, that was the first thing I asked. Well, it was actually, it's kind of fun. You get to find out a few days before they announce it, but you're not allowed to tell anyone, and it was kind of making my head explode. I told my fiancée, but I couldn't tell all my friends. But in the meantime, I was like, okay, before I tell them, I got to figure out what I've been nominated for. So I actually looked up the Wikipedia page for the Eisners, and the special recognition category is what used to be known as the talent deserving wider recognition. And they changed the name last year. But it's a category that in the past that Alex Robinson was nominated and won in, Brian Michael Bendis. When I saw the names that had won in the past, I was like, oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Okay, so reason Matt's on again today is we wanted to talk about this course that you've been teaching. I guess it's just wrapped up?
Yeah. This semester, it was a 16-week graphic novel workshop at the California College of the Arts.
Okay. So
in the end, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. So how did you land this job teaching?
It was a strange coincidence. I actually taught the fiction workshops at UC Davis. And after I did that, I took a year off of teaching. It would have been my 10th year of teaching then. But I took a year off to finish the book. And when the book came out, when the Homeless Channel came out, there was a little blurb in the alumnus newsletter. And the head of the writing department at California College of the Arts happened to be a Davis alumni and saw my name in there, and they were looking for someone to teach the class, so they sent me an email, and out of the blue, I was an employee of the California College of the Arts, senior lecturer of comic books, which still I think is bizarre, but
Wow. Well, yeah, it's usually that kind of weird route that people get that kind of job, I think.
Well, I've never been a real regular blogger, but on the website that I set up for myself, I think it was 2005, I did a real short post where I was like, gosh, if someone could just combine comics and teaching, my two passions, and just offer me a job. And then, 2 years later, it happened, and I had to go back and quote myself from that in another post because I was just so weirded out by the whole thing. But it's turned out fantastic. It's been a really wonderful time.
So, what was your what was the title of the course?
It was called a graphic novel workshop, and it was technically a literature class. But we had half of the class were writing majors and half of the class were art majors, and it ranged from illustrators to photographers, and we even had a furniture maker in the class, and his comics were fantastic. So, The emphasis was certainly on making comics. We read a lot of great stuff. We read Jimmy Corrigan and Gene Yang's American Born Chinese and Exit Wounds, and of course tried to and Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, and tried to deconstruct the comics. Sorry about the show fun there, but really we tried to deconstruct those and figure out what made them tick, and then see what we could do with our own work.
Okay, so how did that go? Just you kind of walk through what you did in the course, maybe. Your syllabus.
When I first went in, I didn't know. This is the first time the course was offered at the college, and so I was writing the curriculum, and I didn't know how experienced the students were with comics, and much to my pleasure and surprise, right off the bat, I realized that they actually had a very sophisticated understanding of them. So we were able to dive right in, and we started again by analyzing other work, but then doing small exercises. One of the most wonderful things about comics is the way you can play with time and space on the page. So we do exercises like a 3-page comic where on the first page you'd have a 6-panel grid, and you'd have to represent a single scene that took place over the course of 1 second. And then on the next page, another scene that took place over the course of 1 hour. And then on the third page, a scene that took place over the course of 1 day. And you can see really quickly how you can compress and decompress time on the page. So exercises like that, just to start limbering up and getting used to how the language of comics works.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that's
something. But from there, every student was required to create their own comic from beginning to end. Whether they were a writer or an artist, they had to do all the different tasks because I wanted them to get a taste for all of it. And that's when I was really, blown away by the work. We had a couple students. You can even see their work. One graduate student named Ben Costa, who has his comics on webcomicsnation.com, and they were turning in work that was of the level that I've been finding in some of the industry's top-level anthologies and publishers like, Top Shelf and Fantagraphics. And I was really excited at that point. And that's when we had our first speaker in. We had Joe Keating from Image Comics stop by and talk about his work on the Pop Gun anthology. So that all kind of came together really nicely at about the mid semester point.
I see.
But then I had them collaborate. About 80% of it's my estimate that about 80% of comics are collaborative. Of course, the more independent comics tend to be a single creator, but in the rest of the industry, it always is several people working together. So that's when they did a collaborative project that just finished up, and they just turned in, and those were really interesting. And then we ended the semester with, I don't know if you're familiar with, there's a French cartoonist named Christophe Blaine.
No, I don't know.
Who did a book called Isaac the Pirate. And he was touring the West Coast here, and he stopped by class with his translator, who was also named Christophe, which was kind of fun. And we didn't know quite what to expect. I quick ran out and bought 10 copies of his books and passed them out to some of the students who were interested in getting to know his work before class, and they all came back, and I knew his stuff was good, but they were really thrilled by his work. And he came to class and kind of, it was the last class, and I was a little worried about, summarizing and bringing all the ideas we were talking about all semester together. And as I sat there and he sort of talked about his philosophies of comics and so forth, I just was like, okay, he just did my job for me. And it was a really nice way to end the semester. So I really highly recommend looking out for Christophe's work. And he actually has a new book coming out from First Second called Gus in the next quarter. So. Yeah, it looks really cool.
So did you have any other, who else did you have come into the class?
Well, over the course of we had the 2 guests come into the class, but then the San Francisco Jewish Community Center is currently running a series called Cereal Boxes, and it's 5 lectures by internationally recognized cartoonists, and they're all sold out. So what we did was our class volunteered to usher the events. So we went to see Marjan Satrapi, who did Persepolis. And so we ushered for her event and got to meet her and listen to her lecture. And then just last week, we ushered a discussion between Chris Ware and Art Spiegelman. So while I don't have the bank to get Art Spiegelman and Chris Ware into my classroom, we certainly, since we live in San Francisco, we're able to extend our class out into the community. And, ushering, we got front row seats. So that certainly didn't hurt either.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, good strategy.
Yeah.
What I was going to say about the exercise you were talking about doing an event that took 1 second and took 1 day, whatever. I would think that comics is maybe the best medium for doing that kind of thing. Seems like it would be harder to do even with film.
Oh, absolutely. The types of exercises we did, I tried to pick concepts that really highlighted why I have picked comics as the thing I want to wake up and do every day. There are certain types of stories that I really believe are best told in comics that I really cringe when, people of course have different takes on the way I do comics and using the photographs and all that stuff. And, a lot of things when people don't find it appealing, that's fine. The one thing I really cringe is when people call it storyboards, as in movie or film storyboards. And, so the exercises I presented to the class were all to show that my absolute love for the way that a comics page works that is 100% unique from any other medium. And I actually surprised, the jaws dropped when on the very first day, the first exercise I asked them to do, which was their first homework, was to give me their life story in 2 pages. And they're all like, well, I can't do that, blah, blah, blah. And, and some of them tried to cram their life story into 2 pages. And, for what it's worth, they were interesting in certain ways. But then I had a student who basically did 2 pages of him eating a sandwich. And it was just this great use of time and space, and there was nothing much going on. And in the end, I looked at that and said, "That's your life story?" He said, "Yeah, it's pretty much my life story." And it was my favorite one. So, there's definitely ways that comics can work, and in terms of the page as a metaphor and the way that time and space is so wonderfully squishy, that the class was really a fun way, not only to help the students understand that, but there's kind of the cliche that you understand something best only after you teach it. Mm-hmm. And that was totally true for me this semester. The last day, as I'd mentioned, when I was sitting next to Christoph, and I was, asking him questions, prompting him to talk more about certain aspects. About halfway through the class, I sat back and I realized that I was the student there. Mm-hmm. As much as all the students were hanging on his every word, I was the one getting to ask most of the questions. And I was just totally taking advantage of the opportunity, going, wow, for some bizarre reason in my life, everything has come together, so I get to sit next to Christoph Blaine and, pick his brain about comics. So it definitely was a benefit for not just the students, definitely for me as well.
So, yeah, I'd be interested in hearing some more about some of the work that the students did.
Yeah. Well, you know what? One thing that I didn't limit them to is turning their work in on paper. And so some of them really took advantage of the web and had comics that would basically be long. Like if you had printed it, it would have to be a very long scroll that you would open up across the floor. But on the web, just put your cursor at the bottom of the screen and slowly slide across, and there was something really fluid and interesting about reading a comic that just scrolled across your screen. And those are things that I never expected any of the students to try to do. And it was just their enthusiasm to try new things. I had one student, Flora Darby, who was my photography major. And of course, I was sort of interested to see. I was like, okay, so there's another photographer in the room who's going to be doing some sorts of fumetti type style projects. And she actually looked at some of what I was working on, and then totally kicked it up a notch. Like when she turned in her project, I was like, "Oh, you're kicking my ass!" It was amazing. She was taking her photos, and just some of them have such confidence in their artistic abilities that her pencils that she did over on top of the art was so fluid and so natural. And I actually, when we were critiquing, so that's the other part of the class, is then they turn their work in, and then we come back the following week, and we all sit around, and for 20 minutes, half an hour, we talk about their little 7-page comic as if they weren't in the room. And I just admitted it. I said, when I read this comic the other night, I went back to my drawing board frustrated with myself and started trying some of her techniques. And I don't know, on one hand, I like to be honest and humble in front of the students, and on the other, she was sitting there going, wow. So that was really fun. So we had that, and then I also took on an independent study before class, and I got to tell you, there's some students who were saying, I'm taking this for a kick. I think it's going to be fun. I think it'll help me with my film work, or it's going to help me with my illustration. But I'm going to be able to look back a couple years from now, and there's going to be new Eisner nominees, and I barely, all I had to do was sort of just keep saying, go, no, keep going. You're doing awesome, because they have imagination and the technical skills that, well, I wish I had started when I was their age. I didn't start making comics until I was 28, and now I wish I'd started when I was an undergrad.
So, besides photography, were there any other kind of unusual media used? I mean, was it mostly just pen and pencil or whatever, or did they use other kinds of media?
Well, we actually ran into some, I think some of the production realities. One of the things, if you're in a fiction class, you print up 10 copies of your manuscript and you pass them out. But if you're in a comic book workshop, you have to make mini comics, basically. So one thing I did was I brought in a huge box. Basically, I raided the Isotope Comics in San Francisco, and I went in and I just asked to borrow a ton of their mini comics that they had there. And so I picked the widest variety of types of comics, all different shapes and sizes, and then kind of just dumped them out on the table and had everybody sort through them, and we talked about them, and talked about everything from appropriate price points, to how you actually mechanically reproduce them to look the way they did. And so I had one student who painted these glorious pages that were larger than 11 by 17, and when you put them up on in the class, they were stunning. But then the reality of scanning pages that large at a high resolution, finding someone who do a small print run at a reasonable price, and it was an interesting learning experience in a totally different direction there. So, yeah, I encourage her to continue doing it, but to find a publisher who's going to foot the bill.
Yeah, well, and then there's something that big. How well did it reproduce at a kind of standard size? Right,
and I think some of the, and these were well, here's the thing. I remember when I made my first mini comic, the night before I had to have I paid for my table at the Alternative Press Expo, and my stapler keeps jamming, and I remember panicking, and it was kind of interesting to see them get to work out all the bugs from the actual creation of their comics before they get a table somewhere. I went up to Stumptown, the Stumptown Comics Fest in Portland, and I came back so enthused from that show. I told them, I said, we have got to get a table at the Alternative Press Expo in November. So I'm planning on paying for a table for myself and my Writers Old Fashioned crew, and then we're going to get a table for the California College of the Arts, and we're going to put the books out that we made in class. So, so yeah, so they got this. This is kind of a practice run for them.
I see. So what did you learn from teaching the course?
Well, I in terms of learning new things, I don't know how much new I learned. I think what happened was all the things that were starting to come together for me as a creator were sort of all reinforced, and that was a wonderful thing. When the things that I was teaching and trying to lead the students to conclusions about certain things that I thought were important aspects of comics. When just last week when Christoph was sitting there, and without any prompting was sort of echoing some of the ideas, I think it was really rewarding for me to go, okay, no, I'm on the right track. Some of the things that he was saying that I thought were really interesting were concepts such as you don't have to worry about creating complexity in your story. Start with a simple idea and explore that simple idea. And we as people are completely complex, irrational, confusing things all on our own. And that is naturally going to percolate to the surface as you're creating your story. And as long as you follow that simple thread that you're slowly pulling at, that all those other things will come out naturally. And so that's something that I was like working with the students, and then we'd see a student kind of follow that philosophy, and the project would turn out wonderfully complex and interesting. And then to hear someone whose work I really admire echo those things, like as a whole, I just came away really confident, I think, in sort of where I'm at in terms of what I think about comics, and storytelling in general. Yeah, it was good. And it didn't hurt going up to the Stumptown Festival in the middle of the class either, because if you're back in the States and you're looking for a place to see comics that are vital and doing new things and doing spectacular things, the Portland comic scene is really hopping right now. And that show in particular, it didn't feel like a con. It felt like a festival. And the whole semester was about all these little things clarifying for me. And, it certainly didn't hurt when, like, at one point in the semester when I was teaching, and then I was not spending very much time working on my own work, and I was losing a little bit of confidence in terms of that little Eisner hoo-ha happened. So that certainly didn't hurt at all.
Yeah, so tell me more about the Stumptown. Were there any big names there, or was it?
Oh yeah, it's a show that's really on the rise. The special guests for the show were Craig Thompson, who did Blankets and is working on his new book Habibi. Mike Richardson, the head of Dark Horse, and then the big new name this year was Brian Michael Bendis was actually at the show.
Now he lives in Seattle, doesn't he?
He lives in the Northwest. I'm not sure if it was Seattle or Portland, but it certainly wasn't much of a hop to get to the show. And the one thing about the show that I thought was so wonderful is that, if you go to San Diego Comic-Con or New York Comic-Con or Wizard World, and Bendis is there, Bendis has a line out the door, deservedly so. But at Stumptown, Craig Thompson's line is the line that's out the door. And Bendis has a nice line, but has time to talk. And everybody got a chance to visit with him. And meanwhile, Craig Thompson, who, of course, would be lost in the crowd at Wizard World, couldn't stop signing. He couldn't take a break because there was such a line. So
is he from that area, Craig Thompson?
He is from that area. Actually, Portland's an interesting town in terms of comics in general, because you have Steve Lieber's Periscope Studios, which houses, tons of creators, writers, artists, as sort of a collective there. You have Dark Horse Comics, which is there. You have a bunch of shops that really service both the superhero and the indie scenes. And there's a couple big name creators there living there as well. And we got to spend, lots of time talking to. I got to pick Gene Yang's brain for a while, and he actually is taking over and teaching a comic book seminar at California College of the Arts starting this summer. And so we got to swap notes on that, and it was the first time I got a chance to really sit down and talk to him for a while. And we visited a long time with Jeff Parker, who is doing terrific work for Marvel, and of course his Agent of Atlas series was fantastic. So this was really nice. Oh, and the other thing was, when I went to Stumptown last year, I was flying solo, and whenever I do a convention by myself, it's kind of a tricky deal to not only manage the table, but get a chance to go around and see the show. It doesn't usually happen. But I brought up my Writers Old Fashioned crew with me from San Francisco with Kirsten Baldock, the Smoking Guns with Fabio Moon, and Jason McNamara, who you interviewed, and Justin Hall, who does True Travel Tales. And we shared a table, and I think that's the best way to do a convention, because then you get a chance to walk around, see the floor. You get to take bathroom breaks. Yeah, so, and we came back from that. So this whole, even though I haven't gotten a ton of time sitting down at my table in my studio this last couple months, everything that had been percolating in my head prior to this has all been really clarified by the class, by the fantastic fest we went up to, and now I have summer. So I'm really looking forward to spend some time in the studio today, and then my fiance's out of town on a business trip this week, so basically I'm just living in the studio. So
how, you're getting started on your new book then?
Yeah. I flew down to Los Angeles a couple weeks ago and did a photo shoot with some actors and actresses for the opening scene. It's kind of getting my bearings on what the new look for the book is like. And I've set up a work blog at my website where I showed a few clips from behind the scenes from the new, a few panels, few pages, and the art style is definitely changing up a little bit, but still based on the photographs And so now in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be putting the final touches on the script and the outline so that I can set up the rest of the shoots this summer.
I see.
So yeah, little by little.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at your work blog here. Well, I noticed there was a picture like on the front of the site too it said it was from the new book.
Yeah, I'm working with grayscale this time. Not quite that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, trying to take it a little bit different direction. Actually, in some ways, addressing some of your concerns with the art on the original book. And they were, there were some things that I was struggling with as I've been learning how to adapt these photographs into a style that doesn't feel stilted or posed.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to find a way to make it feel as natural and fluid as an illustrator would be able to. It's art by an illustrator who could just sit down and nail
mm-hmm.
the shot perfectly. So,
yeah. Well, I'm looking at this picture that you've labeled "Drawing Pretty Girls," and it looks like you're moving in the right direction in terms of what you just said. I mean,
I appreciate that.
I mean, she is pretty, but aside from that, I mean, it feels kind of smoother and not as kind of frozen as some of the previous work did.
Well, and for what it's worth, some people have said that using photographs could be a crutch or something to lean on, and I say, okay, well, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to try to take full advantage of it. And part of what has helped is the changing of tools that I've been using, and that particular shot that you're talking about. If anybody visits the website, I'm drawing directly on a monitor now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. What kind of equipment is this?
Yeah, it's pretty much new to the market in the last. New to the pro-consumer market in the last couple of years. I mean, they've been available at price ranges that have been totally out of my budget. But Wacom, the company that does a lot of the tablets that people draw on, which still require a certain amount of hand-eye coordination. You're drawing down on the table and you're looking up at the screen. Mm-hmm. And what they've done is they've taken that technology and they've embedded it directly into the flat screen monitor itself. Mm-hmm. So I've got 1,000 points of pressure with my pen. I draw directly on the screen. That screen itself flops down, turns 90 degrees, depending on what angle I would like to draw at. Mm-hmm. It has some programmable buttons so that I can zoom in and out as I'm drawing, and it absolutely has changed the dynamic of how I work. I take that photograph and blow it up in Photoshop and then put a layer directly on top of it, and I can just draw. Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about the stiffness and so forth, before I was so careful not to make a mistake. Mm-hmm. And now I program one of those little buttons to be undo, and I just go at it. And if I do something that's horribly wrong, it's just one click of a screen and it's gone. So I'm actually able to take a lot more chances and sort of relax as I'm working.
Mm-hmm. Now, I got a Wacom tablet, and I wasn't very happy with it. And the main thing that bugged me was kind of trying to, quote-unquote, write on that surface. It felt much too slippery for me, I mean, being used to paper. And I just didn't feel like I had the control I had on paper. But what's the surface of this thing like?
I don't sense a slickness to it. It has, I guess, what would feel like a matte finish. But it's plastic, and the pen has so much sensitivity, and the way the pen is calibrated with the screen is of such accuracy that after working with it for an hour, it feels 100% natural. Mm-hmm. Now, I've played with the tablets before, and I sense a lot of the same things you're talking about. So Wacom often has a booth at major conventions set up so that you can actually walk up and play with it. Mm-hmm. And, I work in a building. My studio is in a building that has artists of all different types. There's jewelry makers and furniture makers and photographers. And actually an illustrator was walking by my studio the other day. I usually leave the door open because it feels more social that way. And she poked her head and she's like, "Oh my gosh, what are you working with?" And I said, "Well, here," and I let her sit down, and she practically started tearing up. It was pretty funny, and I'm not exaggerating about that. She's like, how much is this? And then I told her, and she's like, I might have to start saving. So it is interesting for people who are already working with Photoshop, working with the computer, that it's such a more organic way to interact with the computer that I don't know. It was worth saving up for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like it would be quite a step up from the old tablets.
Yeah.
So what's the subject of your next book?
The new book, I'm I'm doling out little pieces of information here and there, not because I'm trying to build up suspense or anything, but mostly I'm trying to keep it a secret from my fiancée. So it's a sort of a mystery, sort of a thriller that's set in the high-end art world. The main character is a freelance writer for Vanity Fair who's doing a piece on the billionaires who spend $125 million on a single painting, kind of at a whim. Mm-hmm. And he's doing a study on these personalities and what it's like to have that much money. And as he's doing that, he sort of stumbles on to some interesting ways in which their money is acquired. And one particular case where he focuses his attention to, he befriends the person, but then ends up way in and over his head in terms of his investigation. So it's it compares, like if the last one compared to an Aaron Sorkin television show, this one probably compares more to a John Le Carré novel. So really excited about it. So it's a very fun story. I'm enjoying it.
Okay. So you got like the script written now, and you're just starting in on the art aspect?
Yeah, well, I write, basically, I write for myself as if I were the artist, but I write Marvel-style scripts for myself. If I'm working with another artist, I write full script. But for me, I write Marvel-style scripts, do some thumbnails, and then go shoot the scene. Because if you're working with another artist, and you spend tons of time carefully crafting each piece of dialogue, and then you get the art back, and you're like, that expression just doesn't work with the dialogue. And then you have to spend an equal amount of time carefully crafting that bit of dialogue again. I don't want to do that to myself. So I give myself the approximation of what needs to happen, what's going on. I shoot all the footage, and then I come back and I create the page from that, and then I do the final scripting only after I've locked down the page, saving myself a ton of time and headaches. And then also the dialogue is, I can try to, create a real nuanced feel that looked like it always belonged with that shot naturally.
Mm-hmm. I see. So just kind of a basic story progression at this point, and then you'll do the dialogue last.
Yeah, that's what I did on the first one. That was one of the things that felt the best about that process. I've revamped a lot of things learned a lot of stuff from working on the first book, but that's the one part that I felt really confident coming out of that book with, so I'm sticking with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Okay, well, thanks for coming on the podcast again. This is really
it's my pleasure.
Okay.
Absolutely. I look forward to talking to you again.
Okay. All right, take care. Have fun on your book.
I will. Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Matt Silady's website is at mattsilady.com, MATTSILADY.com. Deconstructing Comics is sponsored by ComicsNow.com, offering a discount of 30% off everything in stock. Subscribe to any number of comics series through Comics Now, and your discount is 35%. Comics Now provides many of the comics we review on this show. They also provide comics previews in Eric's newsletter, which you can read on our site, globalcomics.net. Our theme song is performed by Firewater. Let us give you some feedback on your comic. Send it to us at podcast@globalcomics.net, and we'll review it on the show. Also, if you'd like to send us a donation to help keep the show going, use the PayPal link on the podcast page at globalcomics.net. And if you can't afford to shell out, at least tell your friends to listen, especially if they have money for us. Just kidding! Next week, Brandon and I will be reviewing Brian Lee O'Malley's Scott Pilgrim and Michael Rabagliati's Paul Has a Summer Job. If anybody knows how to pronounce that correctly, let me know. Till then, thanks for listening. This is Tim. See you next week on Deconstructing Comics.